Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and this is going to be the part two to the video I did recently about a missionary who speaks to, who calls himself a Messianic, who speaks to an Orthodox Jew in Paris. And this is what I mentioned previously in the other video, that there was something he mentioned about Daniel 9 that I wanted to cover. Now, just so it's known, I'm gonna let him kind of say what he's gonna say. And this is the missionary here. This guy here is Orthodox. He, I guess, was in Paris, and this organization called Tovia, which I think is connected to Jews for Jesus. They go around and kind of do interviews on the street. And mostly, from my understanding, it's done to kind of like missionize because it isn't just like they go ask questions and it's like, okay, well, that's what you believe. Okay, great. Just wanted to know. But there's actually a specific point that they're trying to make, and he actually mentions that at the end of the video. But I wanted to kind of cover this part here and see what, the response is to that. So listen to hear what he says here.
And according to the book of Daniel in Daniel chapter 9, yes, the Messiah is supposed to come and establish his mission, yes, before the destruction of the second temple.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to cover here, this particular claim, because I've seen this claim in a number of different ways, and I think one of the best responses in English that I've seen to it is something that Rabbi Tovia Singer did when he was asked this question in Jerusalem a number of years ago. And I'll switch to that video, and then I'll actually pull up the text of Daniel and actually show some other elements of what he's talking about, so that it isn't just him saying it, because he does show some things from the text, but I want to actually go to the text after we finish that point. Okay, so let's listen to Rabbi Singer's response to the same question concerning Daniel 9. And the original here, which is going to be a lot longer than what I present, can be found on Rabbi Tovia Singer's YouTube page. But you listen to this response and think about what exactly he's saying. And there's something he brings up at the very initial point of the response that is very interesting.
The Tanach. I will start with Daniel. Yeah? Is Daniel the truth? Or will you also tell me that Daniel at the end was miscalculating on his numbers?
Oh, no, Daniel's the word of God, of course.
Daniel is the word of God. So Daniel in chapter 9 gives us exactly the year when Mashiach is going to come. And he tells us that after he came, the temple...
What is this calculation? Please share it with us.
The calculation is in the scripture.
So tell it to me, please. I'm very curious.
Oh, you know the calculation.
So if I know it, why am I not a Christian?
Very interesting that I hear other times, oh, Daniel did miscalculate.
I'm not, just like you're not responsible for Roman Catholics, don't make me responsible for everybody else, okay? All right, so now, please tell me the calculation of Daniel chapter 9.
We have a clear calculation. Everybody can read it out.
No, you're not being honest now. If you have such a fantastic calculation, don't tell me I know it. If I do, no, don't. What is that calculation? I'm listening. Okay. Give it to me. What is it?
What he told us this weeks that will pass and will pass till Mashiach will come, brings us to the year 32.
Really? How does that? Please tell me the math. I'm very interested.
We have to get aboard.
Why at the board? Just give me. Believe me, I'm very familiar with the text. If you just tell me when we start counting, I'll know exactly. When do we start counting the 490 years? You tell me.
Oh, you have it.
I heard of it once in my life, yes. When do we start counting this? No, I'm asking you. You're saying you believe in this faith, and this is the first verse you ever brought up. I asked you a question. I think it's a fair question. Please, tell us this calculation. And I asked you the most simplest thing. If it's a 490-year prophecy, please tell me when we start counting. It's a fair question. So please, it's changed your life. Tell me when. I say it as a brother.
I have to answer on that. This is not the point that changed my life.
Well, you can't. What you're doing is...
When I bring it up, I hear everybody telling me that this is a miscalculation.
Please, all right, I'll do this. Let's jettison Daniel 9 then. If you're saying, you're actually bringing me a proof of a verse, and then when I asked you, just explain it to me without a board, just when you start counting. I mean, you said, I want to talk to you, sweetheart. Listen, brother to brother, achi tachi, okay? Daniel 9, you're saying, contains a chapter of 27 passages. You're saying that in this chapter contains the proof of exactly the day of his crucifixion, which you're saying is 32. Accepted completely. 32. Beautiful. This is what it is. Stay with me. Stay with me. No, stay with me. Stay with me. So, and you're saying you agreed. You said, ha, Rabbi, you know it. So I said to you, it's a 490-year prophecy, which culminates at 32, as you say. Granted all. So I asked you a fair question. When do you start counting, and how do you know you start counting that way? If you can't answer that question, then I would just say to you, then we'll move on to the next topic. But I would say to you tonight, when you go to sleep, you would say, how is it possible, really, that a text that I think is so important that I just didn't even know when to start counting? I don't, God forbid, mean to anything. That's one. I want to say, I think it's a fair criticism. I think, to be honest, you should say, like, I accept what you said, please accept what I said. I want to ask you another question. No, I want you to listen. I promise you, if we don't take another, believe neither, I'll take all of you, not stopping. I want you to listen, because I care about you. And I'll be here for a few more weeks, my time is yours. Listen. Let's suspend that we don't know when to start counting 400, or we don't recall because we don't have a board, whatever. But you're saying that the prophet Daniel, who lived 2,500 years ago, he lived during the Babylonian exile, foretold the precise date that he would be cut off, that he would be executed, the Messiah would be killed. Do you know how important that is? You know what a fantastic claim that is? You're saying that we are told by Daniel, who's a holy man, actually Daniel isn't speaking, the angel Gabriel is speaking, just for context, but it's recorded in the book of Daniel, that the exact moment of when the Messiah is supposed to be killed is recorded in the Jewish Bible. I have a question for you. I grant everything. I want you to answer one question. I want to ask you a question from heart to heart. I'm not chas v'shalom. I don't try to catch you. I'm trying my best to be as honest as you would expect me to be. I want to ask you this question. If this is the case, but think before you answer, we have 27 books in the New Testament. Why, if this is the case, now I would posit to you this was a later Christian invention, but here's the question. If this was not a later Christian invention, I use the word Christian, just give me a free pass on that one, okay? Why isn't this quoted anywhere in the Christian Bible? That means, in order for you to believe that there's a clear prophecy in Daniel 9 of exactly the date, the year the Messiah is supposed to kill, are you telling me that the authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all the letters of Paul, the letters of John, the letters of Peter, whatever you accept, none of them thought that point was important enough to mention the New Testament? Does any sane, sober mind believe this? That means, I hope you got this point. It's not quoted in the Christian Bible. Then in order for you, sweetheart, listen to me. In order for a person to believe that the Jews are wrong and the believers in Yeshua are right, okay, I did it. You have to believe that not one writer or apostolic father, that means Clement I of Rome, it's Daniel 9, meaning the text from verse 24 and 25, 24, 25, 26, and 7 is never quoted in the Christian Bible. They just went, yeah, we do have the exact calculation of Jesus' death, but there are more important things than that. I will say this to you, my brother. If you can accept such thing, you're not being honest with yourself. You cannot believe that no first century Christian thought that would have been important enough to point out. Okay? You can't, and if you can come up with an answer to that question, you will be the first person who believes what you believe can believe that. No sane mind can believe that the authors of the New Testament, whoever they were, believed that Daniel 9 had such a prophecy, or else they would have quoted it. Now, as it turns out, Daniel 9 very, very quickly is a description of a period of 490 years. The Second Temple stood for 420 years. The Babylonian exile was 70 years. Total is 490 years. And that's what it comes into view for Daniel when he's crying out to God. Why is Daniel crying out to God? Most people who quote Daniel 9 never read Daniel 9, 1 through 22. So in truth, it's describing to us an anointed one, a Mashiach, who gives the command to rebuild Yerushalayim and the temple. Who is that? Who is this Mashiach Nugid, an anointed prince, royalty, who gives the command to rebuild Yerushalayim? Who is he? There's only one person in Tanach. Open up your Bible to Isaiah 45, verse 1, and accept Hashem in your life right now. And it says there openly, so says the Lord of Kayesh, he's my Mashiach, who gave the command to rebuild Yerushalayim. That's who it is. What the church did was, they took the word Mashiach appears in Tanakh 39 times. And all 37 other times, it's translated as anointed. As it turns out, the word Mashiach appears more frequently in the book of Leviticus than any other book, because it's the Kehanim who are frequently called the Mashiach, or HaMashiach. So in all other places, all the good Christian Bibles translated as anointed, and only here they translate it as Messiah, capital M, all those things, a capital letter in the Hebrew language, they stick it in there. Then they put a definite article, it doesn't even say HaMashiach, but it's the Messiah. There's a corruption of epic proportions.
Now, I want to comment on this because, if someone could say, okay, well, they might not buy into what Rabbi Singer's saying. So let's actually look at the text. Okay, so this is the verses of Daniel 9 that was being discussed here. So, for example, if you look, there's only 2 times that the word Mashiach shows up in Daniel 9, for example. Here is one of them where it says Mashiach Nagid. Now, notice here, and I've mentioned this in other videos. This word here is Mashiach. This is the one that he says that he was mentioning, that everywhere else in Christian Bibles, when they translate it as anointed, except for right here, they decide to translate it as Messiah, which this word doesn't really mean Messiah. What it means is anointed one, and it's usually designating someone who's in a leadership position. Now, the thing that he was mentioning here is that there's no definite article in this word. In order for this to be the Messiah, or if you want to use the English colloquial here, in order for it to be the Messiah, there would have to be a letter called He before this letter here. This letter here is Mem. This is the beginning. Hebrews read from right to left, so it's Mo, Shi, Ach. Okay. Now, in order for this, then that means just anointed one, like anointed one, a anointed one. So this word here is Nagid. So it's almost like, like someone who's like a leader. So this statement here is Mashiach Nagid. It does not mean, and this is like the, one way of some people translate it is like the anointed prince, but it's not the anointed. It's a anointed one or a anointed leader, for example. And again, the only way that this could have been the Mashiach, HaMashiach, there would have to be this letter here in front, which is a He. This letter here is the definite article. Now, going to the first part that Rabbi Singer was talking about, in terms of this whole idea of what he was, the guy who was asking this question was about this calculation. This is also found in this section here, where it talks about this time frame, 490 years. Now, the thing that's interesting is, if you go by, for example, Daniel without any kind of vowel points in it, or Daniel without any kind of what's called ta'amim. Okay, this, you see commas here and semicolons here. These are representations in this text of the Ta'amim. Maybe if I can find it, I have an actual. I can find like a copy of the text from the Aleppo Codex where it actually shows the Ta'amim. And when you look at the actual Ta'amim, what you find is that there are pauses here. So when it says like the 7 weeks that are mentioned here, there's Shivu'im here, but then there's a pause, and then Shivu'ah. So these 2 ideas here are connected to each other, so 7 weeks. But that's disconnected from the next part where it says, Washivu'im shishim u'shnayim. So this is like, for example, 62 weeks, for example. So these 2 ideas are separated. And in the Hebrew text, for example, in an ancient text, there wouldn't have been any kind of, vocal, vowels, not only vowels, but also punctuation. But when you get to a punctuated text, which everybody uses to read anyway, including missionaries, they use punctuated text. I've seen some of the text they use, and there's punctuation there. There's a separation here, and this in Hebrew, the separation in the original text would be what's called atanoho. Atanoho is like a stop and thought, like a semicolon. So this is what's important here. So if you look for the other area, when it says Mashiach, where it talks about Mashiach being, cut off, for example, it isn't saying the Mashiach. Also here, this is the second word, I'm certainly try to get it here. Moshiach. But it isn't ha-Mashiach. Ha-Mashiach would be the Messiah. Or like in that's in certain types of English. But again, the word Mashiach means anointed one. So it would be anointed one would be the correct translation of both of these, but it's not the anointed one. It's only a anointed one. And like he correctly said that, basically that's talking about Chorash. Chorash is actually mentioned in Yeshayahu, is the one who, basically initiated the rebuilding of the temple. Okay. So what I want to do now, and again, Rabbi Tovia Singer like explained all that, like, in beautiful perfection there. I want to go to another part back to the missionary video of something the missionary says about the oral Torah. Let me see if I can find it here. Um, where he basically, starts saying that he doesn't, believe that there's such a thing as an oral Torah. And I've dealt with that in other videos. And I also dealt with it in a previous video where he was talking to Dr. Michael Brown. Um, basically, let's see here where they go into it. Okay. Okay, so let's see.
That's the same. If we take only the Tanach without the commentary in the oral Torah, it's very complicated to understand what is written.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I've been searching for evidence of the oral Torah from the Tanakh and I can't find any. You know what I'm saying? Like I can't find it, and I know that it finished its compilation in the 6th and 7th century, and every time that the Torah is mentioned in the Tanakh, it's referring to the written law.
Okay. Now this is a problematic issue here, because I've actually shown in the previous video where there's actually mentioning of oral Torah that's being taught. Now the issue here is very simple. When you look in the Torah, in the Tanakh, there's only certain places where the Torah is mentioned as being a written text. And even then, it doesn't describe what the text is. For example, there's no place in the rest of the Nevi'im that actually say that from Bereshit, or people say in English Genesis, to Devarim, Deuteronomy, is the Torah. There's no place in the Tanakh that actually spells that out, as that's where it is. So the Torah, for example, could only have been Bereshit. It could have only been the first book. It could have only been, for example, from like Vayikra or Bamidbar. It's never fully spelled out what that is. And it's only by oral tradition that we even understand what the prophets are even talking about. Because as we said before, the word Torah means, instruction. It doesn't specifically mean written text. So that's where, again, that someone would have to, basically pull up the text. And if you look in, I did a video about my previous video. I think it was probably probably like 3 or 4 of me reacting to these missionary videos, where I actually showed that in the book of Nehemiah, there's actually mentioned that there's an oral Torah, where they explained that they were reading the text and they were like, causing the people to understand the text, and they were teaching them the pirush of the text, which is basically the meaning of oral Torah. I think what the missionaries try to get at is that they've never seen the statement Torah Shabbat Peh in the text, which again, Torah Shabbat Peh is a statement that only describes the words that are already in the Torah and the Tanakh about how to correctly do the Torah. So again, as I said before, this guy here says that he's read the Tanakh. He wouldn't be able to read the Tanakh if it wasn't for the oral Torah. And let's be clear, again, the oral Torah is predominantly the information found in the Mishnah, and it's not all of the Mishnah, and in fact, it's not all of the Gemara and the Talmud. Those are discussions about the information that is the oral Torah and other topics as well. So, for example, the Talmud itself is not, the entire text from start to finish is not the oral Torah. Only elements of it are the oral Torah or discussions about the oral Torah. So one of the things I want to do now is I want to discuss something that's actually mentioned in the New Testament concerning the oral Torah, and who would actually be the ones to know what an oral Torah is. So I looked up in there's a place called God Questions. It's like basically a Christian site, from what I understand, to ask questions. And one of the things I looked up is there's a mention in the New Testament where one of the authors of the New Testament in Matthew 23 has Jesus proclaiming or stating that the Pharisees, the Perushim, as they're actually, really called in Hebrew, sit in the seat of Moses. So let's look at this article. It says, like, someone asked, what is Moses' seat? Okay, so it says the term Moses' seat is found in Matthew 23, where Jesus pronounces woes against the Jewish leaders, or religious leaders. In verses 1 through 3, he says that his disciples and the crowd around them, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Now, this is really interesting, because if there was supposedly no such thing as an oral Torah, and we know that the Perushim are, explained, and even I think it's Josephus explains that they claim that there was an oral Torah, and you have this claim in the New Testament. Whoever wrote it, again, whether the historical, Yeshua wrote this or not, or said this or not, is questionable. But to say the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, sit in the seat of Moses. So, okay, well, first of all, what does that mean? Because the Torah never specifically says there's a seat of Moses that went around and everybody sat in it. There's no statement like that. So it continues, it says the biblical background for Jesus' mention of Moses' seat is found in Exodus 18:13, where it says the next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. And it says a seat in this context is a place of authority. It is similar to our modern metaphorical use of the word bench. A judge may be said to occupy the bench, and the word bench may even be used to substitute for the judge as in the ruling from the bench. In Jesus' day, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees continued in the footsteps of Moses, in that they were the interpreters and the enforcers of the law. Right there, this Christian site backs up the claim that essentially that the Pharisees, the Perushim, were holding by, that there was a Torah Shabbat Peh, because if they're sitting in the if you will, the seat of Moses, as they are claiming here, and able to interpret and enforce the Torah, that means that there is an oral Torah. Because why would you need an interpretation if it's so clear from the written text? And as I said before, anyone who knows Hebrew, and I'll even give an example of this in just a second, knows that you can't read an unpointed text from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago without some oral tradition to teach you what those words even mean. And I'll show that in just a second. Okay, so continuing here, it says they may not have held the same official position or authority of Moses, but they still had a great deal of authority in Israel at the time. If someone wanted to know what Moses would say about something, he could consult an expert in the law of Moses, a Pharisee or a teacher of the law. What Moses said was binding, so anyone who was with the position to tell people what Moses said was himself in position of great authority. So this contradicts what this missionary was saying, because this is a Christian site. This is not a Jewish site that's saying this. So let's continue to the end. In Matthew 23, Jesus points out that even though what these leaders say may be correct, they do not practice what they preach. So Jesus tells the people to listen to what they say and respect their position, but not to follow their example. With this instruction, Jesus honors Moses, the law, and spiritual authority, even if he confronts the hypocrisy of the teachers and interpreters of the law. After saying what he said about those who sit in the seat of Moses, Jesus pronounced 7 woes against the religious leaders. He was arrested and crucified later that week. Okay, so that part, of course, is nonsense. About this whole thing of him saying they don't practice what they preach, but telling people they follow them anyway. Because what they say comes from Moses. So this essentially means that this guy's wrong. This missionary in this video, he's completely wrong according to this. This agrees with the idea that there is an oral Torah that was passed down through tradition. And what does the oral Torah do? It is, first of all, the explanation of how one understands and even reads and even, correctly does the Torah. Because, as the guy mentioned in the previous part of the video that I commented on, essentially, you could take any part of the Torah and something it says, once you understand what the words even mean and the grammar, and say, okay, well, how do I actually go and do that? Now the other thing is that in the New Testament, there's constant conversations that the authors put in of Jesus supposedly arguing with people about what the correct interpretation of the Torah is. He never once tells anybody, according to the writers of the New Testament, he never once tells them just pick up the text and read it yourself. Don't ask any questions of anybody. Just read it for yourself. It's perfectly clear. If it was perfectly clear, there'd be no discussion. There'd be nothing in the prophets to even write about because there'd be no need to understand anything. So what I want to do now is I want to go to a site that I sometimes use, and you've seen me use it in previous videos. And in this site, essentially, what it'll do is actually shows a Torah scroll. It's actually like printed copies of a Yemenite Torah scroll. So what I want to do is let's, it'd be easy to start at Bereshit because I think most Jewish children can easily start there and understand exactly what's going on there. I want to start somewhere a little bit further down. So let's start in Parashat Noah, Naso. So this will take a little time for it to pull up. And while it's pulling up, I'll kind of just discuss it. But essentially what it is that, you've heard people talk about the Torah. And one of the things I know that I really wished I could see is someone who causes, basically tells a missionary, okay, well, let's go actually pull out a Torah scroll. And let's actually go and read what's in it and see what it actually says, right here, right now, on the spot. Now, I would love to be able to see someone challenge them in that way, especially since, it requires like some understanding and skill to be able to actually read what's in like a Torah scroll. So what you're looking at now is a Torah scroll. Okay. So essentially, this is the way that the Torah would look, in ancient times when someone was writing it. Now, again, as I've said before, these are just basically consonants. These are not, there's no vowels here, no vowel markings, and there's no punctuation. So here you could easily clearly say, and remember he was read from right to left, you could easily understand that, this is probably the beginning of a statement. But the question is, where does it end? For example, if I understand how to pronounce this is Wadaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. But how do I know that this is Wadaber? Why is it not Waduber or Wadiber? How do I know it's Wadaber? Now, this letter here is called Woe in ancient Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, we pronounce it Vadaber, like Vav. Now, the thing is, most missionaries, and I'll bet, I'll stake a lot on this. Most missionaries, if you were to put this in front of them, and if they could read this, they would say Vadaber. So the question is, how did you know that it was like Vadaber, not Wadaber? Wadaber Adonai al Moshe lemor, daber al bnei Yisrael wa amarta alahem, ish ki tishta, ishto u'me'aleh vo me'al v'shachev ish atho. So again, I'm reading this now, but where does it end? Where are the signs that tell me where this ends? So it does it end at Wadaber Adonai, maybe like stop. El Moshe, stop. Lemor, stop. Daber al bnei Yisrael wa amarta alahem, stop. Or is it Wadaber Adonai al Moshe lemor daber al bnei Yisrael wa amarta alahem, stop. And this is where it gets into, okay, well, there obviously is an oral Torah that tells me what these letters are, how to pronounce them. Maybe this is not Wadaber, maybe this is We Yadaber. Maybe this is not like, pronouncing this is the name of Hashem. Maybe this is Al and not El. Maybe this is not Moshe, but Misha or Mishi or Mishu. Maybe this is not Lemor. Maybe this is Le Amar. And one reasons I bring this up is that there is a group of people called the Samaritans who have their own Torah with, a different script, and their pronunciation is different than Jewish pronunciation. So again, how you pronounce this can change the meaning of the word. So for example, this could be davar, but it could also be diber. Davar is like saying a thing, or matter. Diber is like saying he spoke past tense. But then again, how do I know that this is davar or diber? You've just heard that there's two different meanings to the word. This here could be el, meaning like like two, like, or el being one of the titles for Hashem. It could be al, like which usually precedes a verb to not do something, like al da'aseh. It could be a number of different words. How do I know how to pronounce it? Bnei Yisrael, okay, bnei, or could be beni. Beni means my son. Bnei means, children, or, in this sense, people of Israel. So the children of Israel, whenever you see the children of Israel written somewhere, it's from this term bnei. Like bnei could be like sons, it could be children, Yisroel. But again, this could be beni. Beni just means my son, but bnei is what's called a construct, essentially meaning it's a plural noun. But, in plural without the Yisrael here, it would be banim. But because of the fact that there's a noun right after, it's bnei. But it could still be beni. Again, oral Torah explains what these words are and how to pronounce them. Well, in this one here, wa omarto. Now, I talked about this in another video. Wa omarto. Wa omarto means like present tense you will do, or like future tense, like you will do something. Where if this was like, for example, modern Hebrew, this would be wa amarta, which means like past tense, you did it already. So instead of it being you will say, it would be you said. But again, an oral Torah lets you know it's wa'o marto. So the difference between wa'o marto rather than wa'o marto means that, okay, wa'o marto means you will do, like right now in future tense, it's like a command. Wa'o marto means you did it already. You said, aleham, ish, where, again, this could be ayish. Anything here could be like pronounced in a completely different way. And again, if you go through the entire text, like here, where do the sentences start and stop here? There's no indication here. You'd have to know. And the only way that Jews ever knew prior to the Talmud was through oral transmission. Because if you look through the prophets in the Tanach, there's no place in the prophets where it explains what the punctuation is, how to pronounce any of these words. And here's the interesting thing. Prior to about 1,500 years ago, there was no written way to explain vowels in ancient Hebrew. What do I mean by that? And if I'll go back to the Daniel part that I was looking at. Okay, so in Daniel here, what you see here, for example, under this letter here, this is Waw. In modern Hebrew it's Vav. So, but here is the Shva. Shva, usually in modern Hebrew has a sound kind of like a sound, like a short sound. This one here is Tsere. Tsere has a sound, like a longer sound. This is Patach. Okay, these symbols were invented about 1,500 years ago, and they were created in order to preserve the language. Why? Because it was becoming harder and harder for some Jews to be able to read this type of like writing where there's no kind of punctuation and no vowel points and understand the exact same things I mentioned to you. Where does a sentence start? How do I pronounce this word? The further Jews got away from having a national, from us having a national system in the land of Israel, the further away it got from people like, everyday Jews being able to fully understand without some kind of assistance. And thus there were people, Jews called the Masoretes, the Masoretim, who created these like markings to be able to mark down that this is the oral transmission of what the language is pronounced. And I'll bet you anything, if you talk to any missionary who does know Hebrew, they will recognize and use these vowel points to try to, pronounce these words. And they'll always use modern Hebrew as their way to pronounce it, not ancient Hebrew. So, for example, this word here is sedech, sadach in ancient Hebrew, sadak, sadag in Temani, in Yemenite Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, it's sedek. But in ancient Hebrew, it's sadag. Now, the reason is because of the vowel points, for example. In modern Hebrew, you don't pronounce like this. This letter here is called Dalet. Dalet in ancient Hebrew had two ways you pronounce it. Whenever there was a dot in the middle right here, it was Dalet. Whenever there was not a dot, it was Tholeth. So Tholeth without the dot, like it is here, Daleth with the dot. In modern Hebrew, there is no distinction between the two. Whenever this letter's here, whether it has a dot in the middle or not, it's always Dalet. So it's like a D sound. But in ancient Hebrew, if it has a dot, it's a D sound. If it doesn't have a dot, it's a Th sound. So the same thing here in Tav, this is called Thav. Thav, basically, when you don't have a dot in the middle of this letter here, it's Thav. But when you do have a dot, it's Tav, Tav. So it's like a T sound. So let me see if I can find a place where, for example, this is the case where you can easily see it. Okay, so let's go up a little bit further. Okay, so here. This is a Tav because it has a dot in the middle. So if you look at this letter, there's a little dot right there in the middle. You see that? That's Tav. That's how you know to pronounce this as Ta Ha Nu Necho. Okay, but here you have the same letter. This is Thaw. This has no dot in the middle. Bith Hilath. Bith Hilath. Okay, the dot without the dot lets you know it's a Thaw. All of this was learned by oral Torah because before these symbols were created, during this time period, there was no way to write out the pronunciation because there were no vowel markings and there were no symbols that existed at the time. So the only ways for someone to have learned how to read any of this would have to have been an oral Torah. What does Torah mean? An oral teaching, an oral instruction, an oral, tradition. So an oral law of how to even understand that. So that is the beginning of the oral Torah. Like, how do I understand this word? How do I pronounce this word? What does it even mean? Where does the sentence start and stop? What is the context of what this means? So, again, nobody would understand how to read any of this stuff without an oral Torah. So, I find it kind of dishonest, when the missionaries kind of talk like this. But that's why I say that the only real way to get this across to some of them, and even to people watching, is you have to actually pull out the actual text, the actual language itself. Because again, I've yet to see a missionary be able to show how they're able to read this without some oral transmission. And then if you even ask the ones who know Hebrew, where did you learn Hebrew? And if you learned Hebrew from that methodology, let's say you learned it at home. Let's say that you have some missionaries live here in Israel and their parents spent money to like teach them, have them learn Hebrew. Well, how'd they learn it? Well, they had to go to school. Why do you have to school if you can just read it? Because obviously you don't know the language. You have to learn it from somewhere in its oral transmission. When you go to a class, the teacher is literally talking to you. Yes, they pull out books that help explain certain things, but the books are based on oral transmission. Like I said before, and I'll have to stress this over and over again, prior to the Talmud, there were no dictionaries of this type of Hebrew. This type of Hebrew, this type of text, there was no dictionaries prior to that point. There were no, grammar, lexicons, things like that prior to the Talmud basically explaining this is the way these words mean. When you look within the Christian tradition itself, the early Jewish Christians didn't even leave Torah scrolls behind. There is no, at this moment, we have no evidence of a Torah scroll a Torah scroll, a scroll of the five books of Moses that was left behind by Jewish Christians. There's nothing. They like I've said before in previous videos, they basically disappeared within two generations of their start. They left nothing like this behind. They left no grammar text behind of how they understood Hebrew. They left nothing behind to explain, how they learned to read and teach and things like that. Essentially, they died out within two generations without leaving anything like this behind. But yet, the same people we talked about in this, article here, when he was talking about the Pharisees, modern day Jews descend from the Perushim, the Pharisees. And the Pharisee is not a correct term because it's not a Hebrew term, but basically the leaders of the Second Temple period are who modern day Jews we descend from. Why did the Creator of all things allow us to continue, but did not allow the Jewish Christians to continue? Why did they disappear within two generations, where you can't even name names within, like, let's say, three generations after their start, four generations after their start? Who were their leaders? Who were their teachers of Torah? That the guy mentioned in the video, or in the previous thing I commented on. He mentioned that they spread Torah and taught Torah. Well, who were the names of the leaders? Okay, once you say Paul. Well, we have no evidence that Paul was a Jew. He claimed to be from Tarsus. That was not a bastion of, Torah learning, for example. So, these are the things that I wanted to comment on this video. I know this is a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but this is where I feel like, I get kind of fired up whenever I see these videos, because it's always one of these situations where it's like, no, how dare you say that? That's not true at all, what you just said. And I find this to be true with these different missionaries, where I think a lot of the problem is that they're kind of on the street catching people off guard. Um, and in some cases, I think they've got two targets from what I can understand. One, their target are Jews, or Israelis who are secular, who really don't know Tanakh, really don't know anything of that matter. So they kind of present them with things of, like, like pulling out a one-liner and quoting something out of the Tanakh and then trying to present it as if it's talking about Jesus. The other target they have are Jews, for example, who do keep Torah, but who may not, in the situation they're in, pull out the Tanakh and say, okay, well, let's go through the Tanakh. Let's, prove it to me from the Tanakh. Here's the text. Prove it from this text right here. But at the same time, challenging them that, okay, this New Testament text you have, it's not valid for us Jews. First of all, in the previous video I showed, the oldest text you have is in Greek. You have nothing in Hebrew and Aramaic. That makes no sense. If all these things happen historically, there should be some Jewish community that can say, yes, we saw that stuff. We saw this guy healing people. I'm one of the, you used to have someone who says, I'm one of the guys that got healed. I wrote my experience down in Hebrew and Aramaic. It doesn't make sense that the only texts, the most ancient New Testament texts, are in Greek. That makes no sense at all. That means that if there ever was something in Hebrew, it wasn't important enough for those Christians, early on to maintain. And then you go back to the question of what happened to the Jews who believed in Jesus. What happened to them? Where are their descendants? And then there's one of the things that people are proud of is that they claim, someone told me, like, oh, they all got martyred off. But that's not something to be proud of. They all got martyred off. I mean, then that means that there's no verification for any of this stuff. So this is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and I'll probably be doing another React video to some other things here. So take care. Bye-bye.